Welcome to the Natural Super Kids podcast, where you will discover practical strategies to inspire you to boost the health and nutrition of your kids. I'm Jessica Donovan, a qualified naturopath specialising in kids' health, and I want to make it as easy as possible for you to raise healthy and happy kids. Let's get into it. Hello. Welcome back to the Natural Super Kids podcast. I hope you're doing really well. Or if this is your first time listening, welcome as well. It's so lovely to have you here. We are in our final episode of our low-tox series. So today we are talking about forever chemicals and how we can avoid exposure, reduce exposure, because it's really hard to avoid it completely. So we're talking about the PFAS chemicals, the polyfluoroalkyl substances. The most commonly known one is sort of the non-stick cookware, the Teflon coated pans, but there are other sources as well. And these are chemicals that we really want to do our best to avoid. So I'm going to get to that in a second. If you've missed this series or the introduction to this series, we've been talking about chemicals, how to reduce your exposure to chemicals within the few previous episodes on the podcast. So you can go back and listen to those. We've talked about plastics, we've talked about pesticides, we've talked about taking your shoes off at the door and why that is such a good habit to get into to reduce the toxic load within your household. And this has all come about from a Four Corners report called Generation Cancer. So we did a whole podcast episode talking about this report. I will make sure the link to that is in the show notes. And I was really confronted, as were a lot of other parents, with the statistics that were shared within that Four Corners episode. And it was really about the rising rates of cancer in young people. Young people being people under 50, under 40. And what I really wanted to focus on that came out of that report was that what is thought to be causing cancer in these young people is, really stems from these people's childhood and the things that we talk so often about here at Natural Super Kids: diet, nutrition, the gut microbiome, exposure to toxins and chemicals, and the fact that a lot of these things are sort of compounding and adding up. And certain people, of course, not everyone, but certain people, there might be, genetic predisposition or other factors at play, are developing, cancer quite young. Cancer used to be an older person's disease. And I'm sure everyone listening can think of someone, within either their close circle or their community, or someone like an acquaintance that has been diagnosed with cancer, under 50, and it's quite scary. But I wanted to turn that fear and that scariness and that heaviness of this topic around and really talk about the things that we can do as parents to give our kids the best chance and reduce that cancer risk for our kids in their adulthood. And so that's how this low-tox series came about. So today we're talking about the forever chemicals, the PFAS chemicals. So they are persistent, they're bioaccumulative chemicals, they're found in a lot of everyday items, and they don't break down in our bodies or in our environment. So they're quite scary chemicals. But if we're proactive, if we can make some simple swaps, it can really help to reduce your family's total toxic load and protect your kids' long-term health. So let's talk about sources of these PFAS. So they're found in non-stick cookware, particularly those Teflon coated pans. If you're still using non-stick Teflon coated pans, please throw them out. I know I don't like to be wasteful. I'm not into, I do deeply care about the environment, but we want to get rid of those Teflon coated pans. We do not want to be cooking our family's food in those toxic pans. The other sources of PFAS are things like takeaway and fast food packaging, grease-proof wrappers, pizza boxes, microwave, the microwave bags, microwave poppers, water and stain resistant fabrics. So this can be, school uniforms, pram liners, mattresses, treated carpets. Again, it can be quite a minefield when we start to look into these things, but water and stain resistant fabrics are often do contain some of these chemicals. Cosmetic products, so things that are labelled fluoro, F-L-U-O-R-O, or perfluoro, P-E-R-F-L-U-O-R-O. Those ingredients contain these PFAS forever chemicals. And quite scarily here in Australia, residue from firefighting foam sites near airports, military bases, industrial facilities, but also in those fire-prone areas that are sprayed with fighting foams. I'm going to talk a bit more about this. The good news in all of this is very recently, July 2025, Australia has officially banned the import, the use, the manufacture and the export of 3 high-risk PFAS chemicals, including PFOS, PFOA, and PFHXS. So this is under the Industrial Chemicals Environmental Management Standard. So this is good. It's too late. It's too little too late, but at least it has happened. So these substances are now characterised under Schedule 7, reserved for chemicals likely to cause serious or irreversible harm. It's just such a shame they've been used widely within our environment already. So this is good news. It represents a major shift in chemical regulation. But there's so many chemicals that are still sort of needing to be phased out. So PFAS chemicals are a concern because they're linked to numerous cancers, including kidney and testicular cancer, thyroid dysfunction, immune suppression, hormonal disruption, infertility, elevated cholesterol, and potentially type 2 diabetes as well. Children and pregnant women are especially vulnerable due to developmental sensitivity and higher intake per body weight when it comes to children. We've talked about that a few times in this series. So they're a concern for everyone, but as always with chemicals and toxins, they're particularly a concern for young, developing, infants, children, and also pregnant women as well. So PFAS accumulate over years in the body and can pass across the placenta or through breast milk. Low-level chronic exposure impacts immune function, hormone regulation, metabolic health, and may set a cancer-prone environment early in life. So we really want to, they're one of those chemicals that are definitely linked with that higher incidence of cancer. So we talked about those everyday sources of exposure to these chemicals, and I want to just dive in a little bit more into that, into the firefighting foam. So in bushfire-prone or rural communities, these PFAS based firefighting foams have been used widely in Australia in these areas. They're now banned, but past use has contaminated soil and groundwater and ecosystems as well. So we're talking, about those bushfire prone areas, but also airports, military bases, and bushfire training sites. So if anyone lives in those sort of areas, you want to be particularly, mindful of these chemicals. So communities that are located in bushfire-prone areas, and especially where things like controlled burns or firefighting exercise occurred, they may still face elevated exposure risk. It's good news that these chemicals have been banned moving forward, but as I said, they don't break down within the environment. So if they're there, they're there. At least we're not adding more to the load. We know from research that firefighters and residents in bushfire-prone areas have been shown to carry higher PFAS blood levels than average. That can be due to either direct contact with these chemicals or even environmental drift. So it's quite scary because obviously there's this balance. We need to fight bushfires, and I'm not a fire expert. I don't know what the alternatives are, how they sort of how they function as opposed to, or in compared to, I'm trying to say, these PFAS based firefighting foams. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that people were aware that if you live in these communities, there potentially is higher levels of these kinds of chemicals. So let's talk about some empowering steps that we can take personally to reduce this exposure to PFAS chemicals. In the food and kitchen, it's really important. As I said, move away from those Teflon coated non-stick pans. We can move towards things like cast iron, stainless steel, or ceramic. Now, so making those swaps can be a huge one. So we want to avoid microwave popcorn. In the packaging of microwave popcorn, that can contain PFAS chemicals. Takeaway and grease-proof papers is a source as well. Look, if this is an odd occasion thing, it's not going to be too much of a big deal. But if you can try and avoid, those grease-proof food wrappers as much as possible, that's going to be a good thing as well. And when you're using baking paper at home, use the unbleached low-tox options of baking paper, because some of them can contain PFAS chemicals. When it comes to clothing and home, we want to choose natural fiber clothing and bedding as much as possible. So things like cotton and wool and bamboo, as opposed to, waterproof and stain resistant fabrics, which can contain PFAS. Again, it's what we do the majority of the time. If you're going on a wilderness trek for a couple of weeks, you're going to need some waterproof clothing. But as we are talking sort of as a whole, it's what we do the majority of the time that counts, remember. And always wash hands before eating, especially after handling packaging or new clothes. Another, reason, it's not just to kind of get rid of the germs, but to get rid of any chemicals that might have sort of built up before we eat. And when it comes to personal care products as well, check ingredients. As I said, avoid those fluoro or perfluoro chemicals. And aim for PFAS-free, phthalate-free, and fragrance-free labels. That's a good sort of general low-tox rule. Now, I talked about the fact that these are forever chemicals. They don't break down, so they inevitably can end up in water sources. So it's another vote for having a high-quality water filter on your drinking water at least, and cooking water as well if you can. Whole house water filters can be great, and another reason to get a high quality water filter. When it comes to cleaning, the HEPA vacuum cleaner filters are best. I've talked about those a few times through this series. So again, vacuuming with a HEPA filter, wet mopping floors can really help to avoid these chemicals coming into your home. And we want to be supporting our families' bodies' detoxification pathways. And I mentioned this in the last episodes when we were talking about pesticides. We can include more of those detox supporting foods in our family's diet. So cruciferous vegetables are great for this: cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, those high sulfur vegetables as well, garlic and onions, that supports liver detoxification. Fiber in general, getting more plant foods in, more vegetables, legumes, whole grains, help to sweep chemicals and toxins out of our body. Keeping our kids hydrated and having that healthy water source is great as well. Regular exercise, sweating, saunas, all of these things can really help. Not that, little kids should be having saunas, but, that's sort of more of an adult little tip that is another, a vote. I know saunas are kind of have become quite popular. A lot of people have saunas at home. It's another reason to have saunas, or, there's lots of saunas popping up in little local businesses where you can go and, have a regular sauna. So it's a good option. So I know I feel sort of overwhelmed by this topic of PFAS chemicals. The exposure is overwhelming because they are those forever chemicals that we've got a limited amount that we can do about our exposure, but there are things that we can do. Reducing that exposure with the things that we've talked about in this episode does add up and does make a difference. And, the positive news of these chemicals being banned too late, but at least it's happened, is a good one. So we can sort of rest assured that decision has been made. So let's go back to one thing that you can do. Choose one PFAS product in your home. Maybe it's a fry pan, maybe it's some food packaging or a cosmetic, and replace it with a low-tox alternative. Think about, a water filter. Definitely switch out those fry pans or other cooking equipment that might be non-stick. I really love the Solid Techniques brand of pans. I know I'm probably going to get that question. There's, lots of low-tox options out there. And yeah, I would highly recommend that that's a good place to start because, we're using fry pans a lot and other cooking equipment that might be non-stick as well. So I hope this has been helpful. I hope you're not feeling too heavy and overwhelmed by this topic. It is, it's better to have a little bit of knowledge and to do a few things to reduce exposure than to not know anything at all. Sometimes, you wish you could go back to being ignorant and not knowing about this stuff because it can be quite, stressful and heavy and you can feel quite anxious about it. But know that knowledge is power. And you can make a few small changes that is way better than doing nothing to reduce your family's exposure to these pretty awful chemicals. I hope this has been helpful. I'd love you to reach out. You can contact us on Instagram over at Natural Super Kids or email us, jessica@naturalsuperkids.com. Let me know how this episode has landed for you, and please share it if you feel like there's someone within your realm that might benefit from this information. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll be back in your ears next week. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. Head on over to our website, naturalsuperkids.com, for the show notes for this episode, as well as a whole heap of inspiration to help you raise healthy and happy kids. I'll see you next week.